ha no komona ke o ke akane o valinu zavai. No gueva hine ha no halo yali. No komona. Ikikimonanaki. Aloha kakahiaka no. Aloha. The title of this video is Do We Have Space for the Living? And what do I mean by this? This has brought many thoughts over the past few months of what we can do to assist the people in their community around us, and how can we support each other on our journeys, on our path, and on our calling. And today is a special day. And why is it a special day? Today is a day of conflict and of joy. On one end of the spectrum, there are a group of families and people that are celebrating the pilgrimage to Turtle Island. But it is also a very sad moment, because they are celebrating the slaughter and the killing of another nation that they have set foot upon. It is also the conflict of many generations of wrongdoings and the actions of a people that have not yet faced their crimes and have not acknowledged nor taken action towards bettering their people, their ancestors, and their future generations. Here in this present moment is a time to make space for the living. We are at an imbalance here in this world where we think we are privileged to live a life that is free of responsibility. This isn't the exact word that's trying to come through my mind, but this is what I can pull out right now, is responsibility. And it's the responsibility to own up to our wrongs, and to own up to our humanistic traits, and the ways that we go about in celebration. I remember back in my family celebrating Thanksgiving, I was the black sheep of the family, where I would say, I don't want to celebrate Thanksgiving. I don't even want to call it Thanksgiving. And my family would always say that, well, you know, we could change the story and just make it a celebration of family being together and having time with one another. But this denotes the fact, the very fact, that there are indigenous peoples suffering and living in their trauma because there has not been any acknowledgement nor any action taken to put resolve to the fact of why the celebration exists. We have indigenous people still fighting for their land rights, still fighting for their homes. I am up here on Mauna Kea, at the base here at Pu'uhonua or Pu'uhuluhulu, where many humans pass through in car, where many people come to pray. I remember passing by here with my grandmother at a young age, and I can see, I have a vision where I see the people of the past. And I remember driving past here and seeing Kanaka Maoli, these indigenous people, these aboriginals living and walking about their days and doing their kuleana that they have to do. I always knew that there was a calling up here, and though I was unsure of what that was, I stand here now, realizing that there is a place for us in all realms and for the assistance of the imbalances that exist today. It is not normal for somebody to remain so still within the silences of oppression. This has been going on forever, yet the acknowledgement and action that it takes for a government like America, United States of America, to relinquish their ties and binds to a nation that isn't theirs, that has caused bloodshed upon a people that was not Pono, that had trickery and ways of diversion that were not in synchronicity to the natural laws and order of man and of nature. And so this is why I stand up here, and many others, is because there is a point in time that just sitting in the sidelines, doing work within the Vau Kanaka, where it does not serve the community in ways that we must be taking action. What do I mean by this? There have been decades and decades and decades of fighting a resistance towards a better day in the court systems, in community circles, and there has not been a clear, advanced movement towards liberation. And so there has to be, for the lack of a better word, radical movement. If that means having to sit in what we so-call right here, the Vau Akua, even though I believe this is more like right below Vau Nu'u, because we are below the clouds, and above the clouds, the Vali Nu'u, and there beyond is the Vau Akua. Besides the fact of that, we need to remember that we have to take action in all areas for the liberation of our people and for the liberation of our land. And it's so intrinsic in my mind that the people and the land are inherent and are one. And though we say for the people, what we really mean is for the land. And the people come secondary. Yet we have these political stances and these hierarchical aberrations that allow humanistic traits to get their ego in the way of what is really the bigger picture here. And as a community, we need to support one another on the journey towards liberation and not judge one another on how and where one must be to become liberated under the kingdom of Hawaii, which is the land itself. It's so disheartening to see a community that is not able to open their mind to the abstract world that is the spiritual, and to get out of the linear, and to really see that there is no separation between one another. It's so interesting, and it's cheeky, because we can gather so quickly for the people of the dead, and gather to pay homage to those that have been that just passed and ascended into the new realms. Yet when it is time for the living to step forward and take the flame of the deceased, that there is no place for them here, and there is no gathering here in the celebration of the living, the celebration of life. And we gather in little numbers. Why? Because we just don't simply see the value in life itself and the joy that we can bring to one another as we have our heartbeats and our blood flowing strong. And breaking those cycles of regret, of the calling towards what you know to be true, and how we get there. And I think this is so important for our people to understand, is that we all have a responsibility to Aina, and we all have a role to play for Aina. And we are all on the same playing board. There is no hierarchy in this world. There is no hierarchy. There are those that have knowledge that should be shared because of the imbalances of our people. There are many Kanakamali that are not afforded the knowledge that is the foundation for our living life here in this world. And we treat it as something that you should work up towards, and that you should only deserve it when you're ready. But I believe that back in the days of Hawaii, that there were those foundational knowledges, just like any institution that exists today, that you had to have learned to really understand the basics of life itself. So how can we make space for the living? And how can we assist one another towards liberation is the question. And I can't answer that for you, but I can answer that for myself. And I know why I stand here on Mauna Kea, here at the base of Pu'uhonua or Pu'uhuluhulu. And what is a Pu'uhonua? Traditionally, that's where people lived and to seek refuge in a time of war or in a time of deceit. Sometimes even it's because they have committed their own crimes. But that is the compassion of our people, is that they are so willing to allow your crimes to be parted if you can make the effort and carve your path and way to sanctuary. And this is what I find so beautiful, is that we're not trying to judge one another, but there is a level of ownership that has to be taken to allow your liberation, your personal liberation, to come into the light. And if that means sitting and praying and being potent within spirituality, then that could and very well be the answer towards the one and for all. You know, this brings me to like the Buddhists that live in the mountains in their monasteries. They sit up on a mountain, committing their lives to the sacred, all to be of selfless service for the sacred and for all sentient beings. And so why don't we have this here in Hawaii anymore? And that is simply because of the colonization and the overconsumption of Western ideology. And I think we are all products here in Hawaii. I can only speak for myself, and here in Hawaii, that we are products of Western ideology and the imposition of white man's law, or Western man's law, and societal norms that makes us think in ways that isn't congruent to indigenous ideologies and indigenous ways of living. And it's so disheartening for me to see people, especially Hawaiians, fighting one another and arguing about the most simple fact that we are all here to protect the sacred. Yet our egos get in the way because we all come from a lineage where hierarchy is the utmost importance within the realms of man. But I come from a lineage where hierarchy existed later on in life. I am only a product of from the beginning till now, and then pushing through to the future. But I know my history, and I know my lineage, and the stories that my mother used to share with me. And as a person that isn't in full belief of the hierarchical system and the monarchy line of King Kamehameha and the prophecies that existed, I come from a line long before where the star people landed here first, where there was no hierarchy. And these people are the very reason and answers the very question is, why should we make space for the living? Because there was a time when we lived in another place, in another life, on another planet, on another star. And there was so much destruction and overconsumption. And the populations of our people were ignorant to see the fact that our own actions have destroyed the world around us. And the days came where we could not change the time of history because we have created our own destruction. And at that very moment, that very humbling moment, we had to bear arms together. And it was so unfortunate that it had to be at a time where our death was so present. It was bound to be. That was the action that it took for our people to bind together as one to seek the liberation and freedom, and then in the sanctity of all that is sacred, to allow ourselves to become one. And at this moment of death, a gate opened up, a portal opened up, and by some miracle, we landed here on this earth. And in these times of being welcomed to a new world, we had to bind ourselves again with one another to protect the sacred and not ourselves. And by shifting our mindset and mentality and way of life, at those times we were able to succeed in life, living, and to become one with nature itself. And what I mean by abstract, earlier on in this video, and not being so linear, is this. there's a story that my mother told me of how they used to shape rainbows. And she was telling me these stories at her deathbed. She had 6 months to live in 2006. And she shared with me what she could and what she remembered and what was shared to her. And in these times, they've learned the ways of the wind, between how it just flows and how it destroys, how water bends and moves, and how all the elements are nothing but the same within currents. The movement may be faster or slower, yet the current is always frequent. They shaped rainbows like prisms, and they were in an order that was yet random, but in line with one another. And there's this dream that I had once, to step out of the story into another. And I was sitting, I remember that night I was praying, and I asked Creator, what is the meaning of you to be here? What is the meaning for I'ol to exist when this world is so apparent in destruction and overconsumption? How is your part to play even present? And so I went to bed that night, and they showed me this dream where I was walking on this edge, and on this edge was this black darkness. As I stepped forward over the edge, I landed into another world, and this world was the realms of the heavens. Now, of course, my name is Michelangelo, Alfonso Michelangelo, and I was named after the Archangel Michael. And just as anything exists in this world, so names have been spoken for eons. They come into manifestation and they are alive. So I walk into this another world, and there I see these angels fighting the spiritual battle against the monster of darkness, whoever that is. And I'm looking around, and I see the colors of the rainbow, but they weren't shaped like a rainbow, but they were the colors itself. And you couldn't pinpoint it. It just flew everywhere. It was so abstract that you couldn't grasp it. You couldn't hold on to it. Yet it could be there in presence. And it would shift in color from green to red to colors I've never seen before. Yet they were not those colors at the same time. And that's when I realized the meaning of life is so abstract, and the calling for each individual is not exactly grasped by man itself, but only to be experienced, and allow the journey to take you forth, and have trust in nature itself, that all exists to persist in life and to seek the balance of our spiritual realms, and for the harmonic convergence to become one. Back to the story. Our people were brutally murdered by migratory men who have not actually learned their lesson on the other world, where they too have come from. And on this land they arrived. And in this land we have relinquished our overconsumption of war. Yet this group of people did not learn their lesson. And they were the fear-mongers and the ones that feasted on blood. A beast that we are well aware of all over the world. And even in those times, there was a victory for us. And because our study of nature was so strong and so apparent, and we have become one with nature, and that we were able to speak the tongue of the winds and of the water and all elements around, that there is a succession in a war where we had hope for a better day. But it took us to go back to the world that we were once living in, to succeed in life, and to fight against the bloodshed of a nation. These fearmongers, what some historically call Pa'au's men, surrendered. And when they surrendered, they had no place to go to. Yet they humbled themselves enough to know that they could not be destroyed, and that their God is nothing but human. And there, they surrendered to us. But we knew it was not going to be an easy ride. No. We knew that there was going to be conflict ahead. And as any family and as any people, especially when there has been wrong done, it takes a while for conflict to be resolved. Whether that's subconsciously, in the present, or within those families that haven't dropped their pebbles and cleansed themselves of their grievances. And so as my people gathered, we had a secret meeting, and we made a vow that as we interbreed with these people that have come to our shores, that our bloodline and our magic and our oneness would be the inherent nature and mindset that would manifest, whether that was in the next generation or 1,000 generations down the line. And we see this dual nature within Hawaiian ideologies, where the Mu have the stories of the oneness and the connection to nature. But then at the same time, Pa'au's men with their structure and lineal descendants. To be respectful. That is what I'll say. And so, here I am today, walking in this story, and I understand the ways of life. Yet, though it is a theory and put into practice, the manifestation of my prayers and the manifestation of my practice itself hasn't fully come into realization. It hasn't become consumable to my being and for everyone around to be evidence to the fact of what we used to be. And so how do we serve the living? And how do we be open to the living? and our true callings? And how do we welcome the abstract and the linear? And then how can we as people come into alliance with one another so that we can become whole again as a people? So that we don't have one person saying that they have all this power over one person or a group of people that they can just walk in and clear out. Or how can we be more harmonious and be like, you know what? I'm free today. I was gonna go to the beach, but actually, I'm gonna go up and go talk story with these people that I've been passing by day in, day out, and see what their story is. How can I serve? Maybe they can serve me. But all I know is that I need to go. How can I serve the living? How can I serve myself as a part of the living? How can I answer the call? I think this is why we respect Kupuna so much. Kupuna, the calls to stand upright, the many calls to stand to the call. This call, the path to stand up straight. It takes courage and sometimes a lifetime to answer your own personal call and listen to divine nature and understand what we must do for the sake and for the betterment of all. And it's so important for us to realize this and to know that we are one with one another, that there is no separation, and that there is a sense that we have to hold each other accountable to how we think, how we speak, how we ask questions, and how we manage our lives, and how we, so to say, can manage another's life. And in that, we can see a better world. But it really takes all of us to be humbled, and hopefully we can do that before world's end. I'll share one more story. The fight for Armona. For me, I can see it so clearly. And it is simply this: that Western man's ideology and science thinks that they are the highest breed, and that their method of practice is the only method. But you see, the way that I understand it is that Hawaiian people did not need metal and screws and lenses and wires and bulldozers to get the answers that we needed to understand. That hunger for knowledge and that hunger to understand where we came from and how we got here. And as that story that I shared with you, of course we would like to know, how in the world did we come here at those moments of despair? And how can we recreate this? And there was that time, there was that awakening when we figured this all out. And we need to go back to that. We need to go back to opening our practices and allowing our portals to open so that the knowledge can come through. They recently did a study on how a piece of the moon broke off. And only now the Western scientists were able to acknowledge the fact that the Hawaiian people already figured this out thousands of years ago. So how were we able to record this? And how were we able to see so far out? And this is just one example of our understanding and our technology of looking into the universe to understand life itself. And it was so integral to all life itself that it didn't have to be just looking into the stars, but we could use our technology and our spiritual lens to look deep into the earth and into the ocean and into the realms that exist around us. All without screws and metal and bullets and political structures that are trickery and loopholes. No. We were so integral to our own being and so responsible to one another that we could open up the realms of the abstract and the linear. But it took the conviction, and it took humbling thyself, and it took working together and understanding that everyone has a part to play and everyone has a key. So this is a short synopsis of a story that is much bigger that I can share one day, now that I'm called to. But here today, we remember the lives that have been taken, and the lives that continue to be taken, and the lives that continue to be oppressed. So as you eat your food today, remember the two sides that we sit on a table with. But also remember that our spiritual maturity and our spiritual consumption is the food that allows us to shift our reality and our world together. But it takes us together as a coven to reach those states and reach those abilities and spiritual realms, so that we can see a better future, so that we can look into the future and understand life itself, and to be of assistance to all that live. So again, I ask you, how can we serve the living? Aloha.